In the face of falling passenger numbers and tumbling profits, one project showed that rail travel in Europe still had a fighting chance, and that was the Train à Grande Vitesse, or TGV. When first conceived in the mid-1960s, the project was considered dead on arrival, but after rigorous developments, testing and prototyping, the high-speed rail system presented in 1981 was a world-class operation that proved that there was still hope yet against the car and the domestic airliner. The concept of the TGV started with two fundamental factors, the Shinkansen of Japan and the creation of nuclear-powered energy. Following World War II, much of the French railway system had been destroyed or damaged by aerial bombing and vicious land battles that had occurred between the retreating Germans and advancing Allies. As such, the national rail operator of France, the Société Nationale des Chemins de Fer de France, had essentially a clean slate on which to rebuild their railways, and thus chose to both iron out many of the sharper corners to increase speeds and to electrify as many main lines as possible. French intercity trains between Paris, Lyon and Bordeaux therefore became among the fastest trains in Europe, with a top speed of between 110 and 125 miles an hour, hauled primarily by electric locomotives such as the CC7100. However, not all primary routes between Paris and the nation's main regional centres could be connected efficiently due to unfavourable topography, especially to the south and east of France, where the gradient of hills meant that railways were forced into winding valley floors. This disadvantage was particularly problematic in the late 1950s and early 60s, as domestic air travel and the motorway networks began to spread across Europe, making both long and short distance journeys far more efficient than the comparatively lumbering railway system. Due to the size of the French nation, air services operated by the new domestic carrier, Air Inter, cut journey times in half, and SNCF were faced with falling passenger numbers on its top expresses to northern, western and southern France. Thankfully, a solution presented itself in the Far East, that being the new Shinkansen high-speed railways of Japan. Japan had pioneered dedicated high-speed railways in the years prior to World War II, as, much like France, the nation was constrained by mountainous volcanic landscapes that were difficult to navigate. Rather than building a railway that hugged the coastline to avoid the peaks of central Japan, engineers chose instead to build high-speed lines that forced their way through mountains and across valleys on a series of tunnels and viaducts, taking the shortest possible alignment between the country's major centres. The first route, the Tokaido Shinkansen, began construction between Tokyo and Shin Osaka in April 1958, and on October 1, 1964, the service commenced with a top speed of 130 miles an hour, shaving 3 hours off the journey time. Initially, French designers were hesitant to consider the construction of a steel-wheel high-speed railway in the same vein as the Shinkansen, and instead proposed concepts such as the Aerotrain, an experimental tracked air cushion vehicle that was first tested in 1965. The Aerotrain could almost be likened to a hovercraft on a monorail, whereby the train rode on a cushion of air over a reinforced concrete track, and was propelled by twin-turbine helicopter engines. With a maximum speed of 267 miles an hour reached, development of the Aerotrain ended in 1977, when the project was deemed too costly to implement. In the meantime, the French railways turned to gas turbine technology as a means of accelerating routes that were constrained by their geography, and from 1967, the first series of turbo trains were introduced, which could operate at up to 160 miles an hour. As energy was comparatively cheap during the 1960s, the general theme of future high-speed rail operations was to have trains operate using gas turbine power plants, primarily based around helicopter engines. Gas turbine units, while suffering from severe fuel consumption, did present several advantages over diesel or petrol-powered alternatives. There were fewer moving parts, thereby reducing the need for lubrication and reducing overall maintenance costs, and they were smaller in size, but could easily provide power outputs equal or greater to those from regular piston engines. Therefore, based on the combination of both gas turbine technology and the potential for a dedicated high-speed railway, the French government launched Project C03 on July 10, 1967, this project being titled Rail Transport Possibilities Through New Infrastructure. The proposal called for a segregated high-speed railway between Paris and Lyon, which would follow the straightest possible alignment between the two cities regardless of the terrain. While there would be viaducts and tunnelling where necessary, the French high-speed rail project, unlike the Shinkansen, would climb and descend slopes rather than forcing its way through them, and while this presented gradients that would be far too steep for regular trains to ascend, the proposed new series of high-speed express units for the route would be expected to pass over them without problems. The first prototype for what was to become the train à grande vitesse, or high-speed train, was a gas turbine unit consisting of 2 power cars and 3 articulated coaches, commissioned from French train manufacturer Alstom by SNCF in 1969. The TGV prototype, known as TGV001, was a multiple unit wherein each set of bogies was powered to improve acceleration, and was propelled by 2 turbomecha Termo turbines carried over from the Super Frelon transport helicopter. The use of shared bogies on the carriages was done to increase the stability of the entire train set, and permitted the suspension to be placed near the centre of gravity for each carriage, thus reducing rolling in curves. It also presented a major safety factor, in that if the train was to derail at high speed, the connected bogies would keep the train set largely in one piece, thus reducing the risk of rollover or individual carriages tumbling, as well as keeping the consist upright. TGV001 was rolled out of the Alstom factory on March 24, 1972, and began tests around Aquitaine from April 4th. The styling of the train, penned by designer Jacques Couper, was ironically owed to the railway's main rival, the car, with Couper claiming to have taken the two-tone orange and white colour scheme from the 1970 Porsche 9146 Muren concept sports car. During testing, TGV001 became the fastest railed vehicle in the world when it reached 198 miles an hour on December 8, 1972, and today still holds the record for fastest gas turbine-powered train. Such was the success of gas turbine technology in rail vehicles that the concept was also adopted in many other new train designs, including the British APT tilting train prototype. As testing of TGV001 continued, approval was granted by the Inter-Ministerial Committee to build a high-speed railway between Paris and Lyon, a distance of 254 miles. However, in October 1973, the project was dealt a severe blow when, following the Yom Kippur War, wherein the Western nations openly provided support to Israel in their struggle against the combined forces of Egypt, Syria and Jordan, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries implemented an oil embargo against the nations of Canada, Japan, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, and the United States, later followed by Portugal, Rhodesia, and South Africa. With this, the price of oil spiked dramatically, resulting in the oil crisis and subsequent economic recession. Suddenly, gas turbine technology was seen as extremely inefficient when compared to conventional diesel and petrol-powered engines, and the TGV001 unit fell rapidly out of favour. An alternative had to be sought, and the solution presented itself in the form of nuclear power and overhead electric wires. France had long been associated with nuclear power, with Henri Becquerel having discovered natural radioactivity in the 1890s, and the French government being strongly involved with the development of nuclear power before and during World War II. The nation opened its first nuclear power station in 1962, and following the oil crisis of 1973, Prime Minister Pierre Mesmer announced the eponymous Mesmer Plan on March 6, 1974, which proposed that all of France's power would be based on atomic energy rather than oil imports from its many colonies. The Mesmer Plan has since seen over 70% of France's domestic power production be based on nuclear fuel, and with the announcement, the TGV project was hastily modified to be based on overhead electric systems energized at 25 kV AC. In response, Alstom took one of the 2 coaches from an accident-damaged gas turbine railcar, Z7115, and rebuilt it into electric railcar Z7001, named Zebulon, which was released from the Alstom factory in April 1974 and began trials on the main line between Paris and Lyon via Beaune. During its 20 months of trials, in which it reached over 186 miles an hour and racked up over 500,000 miles of distance, many structural developments for the new electric-based TGV sets were tested on Zebulon, including the new WISE 226 long-wheelbase power truck, a precursor to the Y230 units used on the production TGV sets, a two-stage high-speed pantograph, and a new type of eddy current rail brake. Zebulon was also fitted with non-pneumatic suspension, and this proved to be perfectly suited to its high-speed operations as opposed to the pneumatic suspension on TGV001. With the technology behind the new electric TGV trains now proven to work well, on March 23, 1976, French Prime Minister Jacques Chirac signed a decree to commence construction on the new LGV Sud-Est route between Paris and Lyon, and building started on December 7th of that year. As construction of the line progressed through the French countryside, matters soon turned to the design of the trains themselves. Again, Jacques Cooper was called in to develop the electric production variants of the train, with the sets being built by Alstom at their factory in Belfort. Cooper's main incentive with both the prototype and electric pre-production prototypes was to build a train that encapsulated the concept of speed, but at the same time wasn't too alienating for potential travellers, with interior spaces designed to be as accommodating and aesthetically pleasing as possible. While the final exterior design of the electric prototypes didn't differ too much from the TGV001, there was much debate as to how the interior would be laid out, with multiple compromises having to be made. While Cooper envisaged a design that would harken back to the golden era of rail travel, SNCF were determined to ensure that the TGV didn't sacrifice too much of its capacity in order to recoup the programme's substantial costs. Eventually, a decision was made to develop an interior that was both functional and comfortable, a true mixture of style and substance that would meet the requirements for SNCF's minimum passenger numbers, while not being too cramped or uninviting. With the train design completed, the first batch of 2 pre-production prototypes was ordered on November 4, 1976, and on July 28, 1978, these trains emerged from the Belfort factory, these sets being named Patrick and Sophie. Sadly, testing of the 2 TGV sets didn't go smoothly, and there were many teething problems to be countered. The main concern regarding the sets were intolerable vibrations caused by the primary suspension springs, but this fault was alleviated through the fitting of rubber blocks under the springs. Eventually, over 15,000 modifications were made to Patrick and Sophie by the time the first production unit, number 03, was delivered by Alstom on April 25, 1980. 6 months later, full track laying for the LGV Sud-Est was completed on November 20th, and from early 1981, TGV sets were undergoing testing on the route, with SNCF ordering an initial 87 sets from Alstom to run the service. On February 26, 1981, an ambitious record run was undertaken by Alstom and SNCF called Operation TGV100, a proposal to run a production TGV set on the LGV Sud-Est in order to attain a speed of 100 meters per second or 224 miles an hour. Setting off from Courcelles-Frémois in the Côte d'Or, approximately 127 miles south of Paris, production set number 16 began its northbound run at approximately 3 p.m. and would travel around 76 miles to Die. During the run, the train not only broke the 100 meters per second mark, but would go on to a top speed of 236 miles an hour while coming down a gradual descent, making it the fastest steel rail train in the world. The TGV 100 record would stand until May 15, 1990, when another TGV set would reach 320 miles an hour while travelling along the LGV Atlantique between Paris and Tours. With the TGV project having proven its worth, the LGV Sud-Est was opened on September 22, 1981, by French President François Mitterrand, followed 5 days later by the first commercial operation of the first phase of the route between Saint-Florentin, 85 miles south of Paris, to Montchanin, 68 miles north of Lyon. This would be complemented by the opening of Phase 2 in September 1983, with the new northern terminus of the route being Commes-la-Ville, 15 miles south of Paris. The success of the LGV Sud-Est and the dedicated TGV sets spurred on a rolling plan to see new LGV routes introduced across the French nation, with the LGV Atlantique to Le Mans and Tours opening in 1990, the LGV Nord to Lille, Calais and the Channel Tunnel opening in 1993, the LGV Rhône-Alpes to Valence opening in 1994, followed in 2001 by the second phase of the route to Avignon and Marseille, the LGV-S to Nancy in 2007, followed by the second phase to Strasbourg in 2016, the LGV Rhine-Rhône between Dijon and Mulhouse in 2011, the LGV Sud-Europe Atlantique to Bordeaux, and the LGV Brittany-Pays de la Loire to Rennes, which both opened in 2017, and finally the LGV Méditerranée extension to Montpellier in 2018, while many more are proposed for delivery before 2030. In addition, the TGV's success has inspired the creation of other European high-speed rail networks, many of which connect directly to the French LGV routes and provide international connections to Paris and other French regional centres. The TGV's ability to transport passengers at high speed across the French countryside brought about a resurgence in the interest of rail travel in Europe, and in so doing destroyed the domestic French airline industry. Air Inter, after suffering sustained losses on its internal operations, was fully absorbed into Air France in 1997, and even today Air France doesn't operate regional flights between Paris and certain major cities within France due to the operation being non-competitive with the TGV. Furthermore, the TGV trains themselves have evolved greatly since the original Sud-Est sets of 1981, including the dedicated Atlantique sets entering service in 1989, the Réseau sets of 1993 that updated the general TGV design, and also formed the basis of export models such as Amtrak's original Acela sets, and the bi-level duplex sets introduced from 1995. The TGV train design has also lent itself to several international variants, including the original Class 373 Eurostar sets, which were officially designated TGV TMST or Transmanche Supertrain, and versions of the French TGV sets modified for use with tri-mode electrical systems on the Thalys service between Paris, Brussels, Cologne and Amsterdam. In addition, the TGV Sud-Est design also formed the basis of a mail train, as the TGV La Poste sets, that operated between 1984 and 2015. The TGV La Poste service worked between Paris and many regional centres across France, making them the fastest freight trains in the world, and while the La Poste service was discontinued due to a major restructuring of SNCF's mail-on-rail operations, one set had the distinction of being the first TGV unit to visit London, after being dragged through the Channel Tunnel to St Pancras Station in March 2012. For the future, Alstom are currently developing a new series of TGV trains called the Avelia Horizon, a series of high-speed sets that will begin delivery from around 2023, but have already begun testing in the United States under their American designation, the Avelia Liberty, a replacement for the original Acela sets. As a testament to the TGV's superb performance, in the 39 years since the first trains began work in 1981, no passenger has lost their life on a TGV train while running in normal service on the high-speed LGV lines, despite there being several high-speed derailments over the years. The only fatalities involved with the TGV have either been through terrorist attacks, such as the bombing of a set in 1983 by the infamous Carlos the Jackal, through collisions at level crossings on conventional non-LGV routes, as was the case in September 1988, when a TGV set struck a stalled 80-ton lorry, killing the driver and a passenger in the train, or while under test, as was the case of the 2015 Eckwertsheim derailment, but this was caused due to excessive speed. Nevertheless, the TGV is truly the high-speed train that helped to reinvigorate rail travel in Europe. Once these versatile express trains were introduced, they injected new life into a mode of transport that appeared to be dying, and refreshed the image of rail operations to make it competitive well into the 21st century. Thanks again for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, why not leave a like, and be sure to subscribe for more great content. Thank you very much, take care, and I'll see you next time.